This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 41, Unwelcome Guests Blow In. The hurricane is a simple but sad fact of life for those residing in the Sunshine State. Though Florida is indeed a pleasant, warm, and sunny place almost all of the time, on occasion, one of the most disruptive and destructive meteorological forces on the planet will make a beeline for the long spit of sandy land residing just 2 feet above sea level that a few million retirees consider a palm tree-studded oasis. One such storm delivered upon us quite a wallop in the fall of 1960. Her name was Donna. She was birthed south of Cape Verde off the west coast of Africa. Her first nasty act of violence was to knock a plane out of the skies over Senegal, killing 63 poor souls in a single devilish swipe. Donna was just getting warmed up. Next, she set her sights on Florida, a few thousand miles distant, with a plan to strafe Cuba en route. She began to strengthen as she churned west through the warm Atlantic waters. My parents, virginal in this, their first hurricane season, took all the precautions suggested by the local press. They headed out to the yard to tidy things up a bit, collecting all the toys, bats and balls, bikes, and lawn furniture scattered about, plus any loose pieces of sheet metal, lumber, concrete, old tires, and steel pipe. Any item that could be lifted and launched into the air as a projectile by a 130-mile-per-hour wind was to be stowed and safely secured. One could imagine, with a small army of boys who often used our yard as home base, that this included a lot of stuff. The media advised the populace to round up all the pets, cats too, kiss goodbye every patio screen, as they would soon be departing and not coming home. Somewhere out there, I'm guessing in the Sargasso Sea, float all of our patio screens circa 1960, perhaps providing a cluster of vinyl villages to varied sea life. Have a boat docked on the bay, cast off pronto, and motor north with thousands of others up the intercoastal waterway. Don't even think about dropping anchor until Maryland. Fill all the bathtubs with fresh water. Scrubbing and disinfecting first was also strongly urged, as residents would be expected to drink from them before long. Though there would soon be billions of gallons of Caribbean clean, fresh water dropped upon residents in the hurricane's path, there would be nary a drop fit to drink. Preparations complete, Dad drove 8 miles up Red Road, collected Grandma, and brought her back to stay for the night, or perhaps the week. In her late 80s, she could not be expected to ride out a major hurricane alone. What son would even suggest such a thing? According to reports arriving with accelerating frequency and escalating urgency, Donna was right on track to be a major storm, perhaps even a Category 5. We would soon confirm that the media got that part right. For many, today's hurricane experience generally amounts to a high-definition image of a youthful CNN newscaster attired in a well-tailored parka, buffeted and leaning askew into heavy wind and rain, accompanied by an audio report broken and popping due to a flailing satellite dish mounted atop a van. While a dark and turbulent ocean churns in the background, all this is interspersed between squall lines with a few Pizza Hut commercials. Enduring a major hurricane and its aftermath is a good deal more than that. Donna blew ashore in the middle of the night with a fearsome roar and the force of 100 rogue freighters, driving right up the backside of the Florida Keys. The small fishing village of Marathon simply disappeared, obliterated by her storm surge, 130-mile-per-hour sustained winds that gusted, more than frequently, to a truly terrifying 180. Donna then entered Florida proper from the southwest and pounded the Sarasota-Fort Myers area before heading north to wreak further havoc as she hurled herself straight up the backbone of the state. Finally, she decided to veer across its right flank south of Jacksonville and again out into the Atlantic, hungry to feed on warm ocean waters so she could bulk up for her trip north to pummel the eastern seaboard. With all pets and cats accounted for, we spent that evening partaking in a quiet dinner with Grandma. Afterwards, my brothers and I peered out the dark windows every few minutes so as not to miss any of the destruction that a frenzied media had been warning of for days and we were certain was headed our way. I was 5 years old and expected the worst, only vaguely understanding what was actually happening in the darkness outside. I clearly remember being both excited and quite scared. At some point following one of the home additions, Dad decided it would be convenient to know both wind speed and direction as he sat at the mahogany bar. One day, he visited a local marine supply store and acquired all the materials needed to build a hemispherical cup anemometer and a wind vane. He installed both way up on the peak of our second-story roof. Next, he built from mahogany, his favorite wood during that era, a beautiful, highly lacquered wall frame to hold the large brass gauges that would help Mom and him stay in tune with what was happening with the breezes atop the roof while they sat comfortably inside. The device worked flawlessly and was, for years, a real hit. Every Saturday morning, my parents and Ding would check the wind speed and direction before leaving for a regatta on Biscayne Bay. They did so even though the actual sailing was 20 miles northeast of our Vista Lane home. As Donna arrived with full force and fury around 3 a.m., we were all huddled in the kitchen, the center and safest place in our home. My brothers and I were piled into a stack of blankets and pillows on the floor, an eye out for wandering cockroaches, who most certainly would also be stirred up by the raging storm outside. Mom and Dad were at the bar, with eyes riveted on the wind speed and direction dials. The anemometer was firmly pegged at its maximum speed, 120 miles per hour, and had been so for over 30 minutes. We thought the device might have been broken by the wind, but would learn in a few hours, as the nasty witch Donna rolled north, that everything was in good order with the apparatus high up on the roof. The directional indicator, a gauge with 9 amber lights that lit up sequentially when the vane hit the indicated direction, was simply spinning around in circles. Clearly, there was a lot of rooftop action that night. The sound was deafening. Consider a very large coven of witches shrieking while freight trains rumble at speed now and then through the backyard. It was that loud, and had been that way for the better part of an hour as the Category 5 monster of a storm attempted to rip off the roof of our house. Suddenly, my parents looked at us and then one another wide-eyed and blurted, at exactly the same time, "Where's Grandma?" None of us had seen or even heard from her in hours after she had toddled off and turned right to the back bedroom wing earlier in the evening. Or did she turn left, out onto the patio? Strangely, just as we spoke, there she stood, squinting into the bright kitchen, almost blinded by the overhead fluorescent lights. She had been in bed, sound asleep, and just wandered out of the back bedroom to find out how things were progressing with the hurricane. Over the roar, Grandma calmly asked what all the fuss was about and why the entire family was up in the middle of the night. She had expected much more of a racket from a Category 5 storm. We all looked at one another and blinked in disbelief. Incredulous and speechless, we burst into laughter with our realization that both of her hearing aids had fallen out and been lost somewhere beneath the covers of her bed. Just then, a wind-whipped and thoroughly sodden power grid supporting the needs of a few 100,000 South Floridians wheezed, coughed, surged a couple of times, sputtered, and failed. Donna had asked too much of the overburdened mass of cables, switches, and transformers. We were plunged into a powerless dark. In 1964, we had another uninvited guest blow through town. Her name was Cleo. After a night of howling winds and buckets of rain, the early morning broke gusty and gray. Sheets of rain still battered the house in swirling torrents. The eye of the storm had long passed by then, so we were in the backwash of the hurricane, not unlike the churning confusion left in the wake of a large ship. By noon, we were left with cool, blustery gust and the intermittent shower. Exceptional weather, in my view. Somewhat unnerved by Mom's stern warning that downed power lines could turn the massive puddles into silent, electrified ponds, we stepped gingerly out of the front door and paused to view the hurricane's damage. All of the yards up and down the street were a flooded mess. An amazing array of flotsam was scattered about among broken tree limbs in brown water a foot deep. Mixed in was a variety of small wildlife that usually lived out of sight, often well below ground. Snakes slithered about, frogs and toads were everywhere. There were turtles. I saw a mouse paddle by, nose up, and disappear under a broken pine branch. Spiders were also in plentiful supply, some positively enormous in size. And then there were the red ants. Entire colonies had been displaced and had regrouped to form huge, drifting islands. Best stand clear. A tree was down here and there. Pine cones were scattered by the hundreds, and the tropical foliage, not known for its durability, was battered. The palm trees lacked their fronds. Every screened-in porch and patio was no longer screened in. Their aluminum skeletons were all that remained. Next door, Dr. Brown's prominent, soaring, two-story patio and pool structure was completely denuded. Only one flapping screen remained, buffeted by the wind. But against the inside patio back wall, his 8-foot-tall, vicious gorilla mural still scowled with menacing yellow eyes, clearly unimpressed by the destructive power of Cleo. Without protection, pools had become waste bins for whatever flew through the air. Ours looked like a war zone. So did monkeys. Most of the foliage that decorated his so beautifully the day before was now floating in it. Lobster and I waded tentatively across the front yard and headed toward the cut-through path to Cricket and Dork's house. With their street set 15 feet below ours, we guessed a small lake might await. We were not disappointed. As we wandered down their driveway and looked up the road, it was indeed now just that, a 3-foot-deep waterway. What floated below the surface or sank to the bottom was, of course, pure speculation. Anything airborne the night before could be in the brew. We quickly realized that this could encompass quite a variety of things. It would also contain sewage, as all of our septic tanks would have likely regurgitated their contents with a new water table now several feet higher than the day before. Then, to our shock and joy, he appeared. It was Dinkle. Somehow he had commandeered a tiny boat, which we had never seen before, and was pushing it along the polluted canal below his house with a long aluminum pool brush. He wore a pair of knee-high waders, a striped button-down school shirt, and a mop of blonde, wind-whipped hair. We hopped in. His small craft was also aluminum, and I contemplated for a moment the conductivity of this metal in light of my mother's warning about downed power lines. We navigated back and forth for a long time, taking turns with the pole, occasionally banging and scraping the bottom of the boat on submerged, indiscernible objects. We would probe excitedly with great anticipation, only to turn up a folding lawn chair or a waterlogged tree branch. We dodged large red ant islands and chased the occasional snake until the sun broke out and bore down on us. It was as hot as any time I could remember. Steam soon rose up, and Dinkle's Street became a suburban swamp. As we walked into our kitchen in the early afternoon, muddied, moist, and quite hungry, we were presented with our new reality. The aftermath. South Floridians live in a rather inhospitable world, and they are only rescued by the miracle of electricity and air conditioning. I am astounded when I consider that at the turn of the century even one human being lived in South Florida of their own volition. I have seen photos of Miami bankers in vested business suits and tightly knotted ties, circa 1920s, toiling away in downtown buildings in the dead of August, windows gaping wide, just begging for a breeze. To sit at a desk all day long, thus attired, with only occasional ceiling fan to stir the heavy, wet air, was to me almost inconceivable. But for some reason, they were there, and toil they did. Standing in the kitchen, we were informed by Dad that life might not be as it was the day before for at least a few days more. With the power out, air conditioning was out. All land for hundreds of miles in all directions was sodden. This meant we would now be presented with humidity of epic proportions. The sun would soon return and remain in force, creating a small rainforest of sorts, not unlike the Amazon, right in our front yard. We would soon experience an entirely new level of steamy and oppressive tropical discomfort. He added that the toilets would need help to flush. In preparation, this was why we had filled the bathtubs with water. We would use buckets to fill the toilets from those bathtubs as needed. This was the same water we would drink, after we boiled it, using a small can of something called sterno, since the electric stove was not going to heat anything. This seemed like a lot of work. Instead, I considered another option: crates of warm Coca-Cola stacked to the ceiling in the garage. Tastier too. All was not lost. Some upside could be uncovered by an optimist. First, the family was uninjured and in good health, even if our spirits were a bit damp. Second, the roof was still attached to the house. Further, our trees all remained upright, and most had been pruned considerably by nature and at no cost. And in the evenings there would be candles for light and flashlights. This could be fun, I thought. Perhaps best of all, Mom suspended bathing activities indefinitely. I feigned disappointment. The downside was the lack of TV or phones, and we would be required to nourish ourselves in unaccustomed and unappealing ways. Dad pointed out that the electric Frigidaire was no longer cooling or freezing anything. Soon, all of the food within it would begin to spoil and rot. We had bread, peanut butter, and a wide variety of appetizing canned goods, and could heat them with sterno, or eat them at tepid room temperature. Ice would be scarce and rationed accordingly. I noticed that the adults had taken their own precautions and had stockpiled a shocking supply of cigarettes and scotch, enough for a few more hurricanes, in my estimate. In some, for me at least, the balance of good and not so good soon tipped toward the unfavorable. The excitement of a hurricane and its aftermath rapidly waned for a 9-year-old boy. I'm not sure how many moments in life can really compare to the immense relief and explosive joy we all felt when the first light bulb flickered to life 3 days after we were plunged into stormy darkness by Hurricane Cleo. Whoops and clapping were heard from Mom and Dad's candlelit bar. Lobster chased Ding in 2 loops through the kitchen and family room and straight into the back bedrooms, yelping all the way. The Frigidaire hummed once again, and our 2-ton air conditioner kicked in with a snort and a screech out back. We felt puffs of cool, dry air waft from aluminum vents, and soon flushed a toilet without the aid of a bucket sloshing about. But, much to my disappointment, the massive puddles all over the neighborhood soon disappeared. Growing up in South Miami, we were repeatedly reminded that no matter how much abuse they suffered, our lawns always bounced back. Chapter 42 is up next, and it's called Sorry About Your Lawn.